Hey, what's up guys? John here. People think that we're going back to normal and things are gonna get a lot better soon. Things are about to get a whole lot worse. We start to see articles like this coming out, and we realize that we're only just begun. Now in New York, they just passed a new law called Local Law 97. And this is where they fight carbon emissions for real estate landlords, for property owners. And this is going to be a very expensive bill, about $80,000 per building. $80,000 per building in a time where 25% of all tenants are not paying rent and the rents are falling. They're plummeting at levels that we haven't seen in over a decade. So landlords are losing money hand over fist. The eviction moratorium is still in place until now, August. We all know that is likely going to get pushed further and further along. And during this whole time, the rental deficit, the money owed to landlords, as of January was a whopping $3.4 billion. Now we know that's far exceeding $4 billion and growing. What is likely to happen? Well, Alon Omar has a solution, and this solution is going to turn all this property into public affordable housing. In this video, I'm going to break down everything that we can expect, because it's not just going to stop in New York. This is going to LA. This is going to go to many other places throughout America. And if we're not smart, we're not aware of where we're going, people are going to lose money. They're going to lose a lot of money. And on this channel, we talk exactly about where things are going and what we can do today to get prepared for tomorrow. So please smash that like button. When you do, you're telling YouTube to share this content and more people get educated as to what's really going on. So please smash that like button. Let's begin. I'm going to quickly teach you how to underwrite a real estate deal in New York right now so that way you can better understand where the New York landlord, where they are standing right now. So this is according to Street Easy. So Street Easy, the rent index dropped by 16.8% year over year in Manhattan, and rents fell to $2,700 per month. That's the cheapest on Street Easy record dating back to 2010. During the first quarter of 2020, right before the pandemic hit, the median asking rent in Manhattan was more than $700 at $3,417 per month. So if you're going to underwrite a real estate deal, what you're looking at is cash flow. Real estate speculators, real estate investors, they go out there and they buy properties based upon the current cash flows or the projected cash flows with improvements. So they take their money and they leverage that capital to go buy a building. So let's say that they bought a stabilized building and all the rents were $3,417 per that example. It's a 20-unit building. It's grossing $68,340 per month. That is called the gross scheduled income. Then we have to look at our expenses, vacancies, repairs, evictions, all of the actual expenses with the building. Sometimes it can be reoccurring maintenance. There's a variety of expenses that you'll incorporate here, excluding your mortgage. You always leave out your mortgage. So that leaves $820,080 per year in gross scheduled income. You take 40%, we'll use that for the example on this building. That leaves $492,098 for your net operating income. The typical cap rate we'll use in this market is 4.5%. So all we do is just take $492,098 divided by 0.045, which will give us a valuation on that building of $10,934,400. Typical down payment for something like that would be about 35%, so about $3.827 million. That's how much money you would need as a down payment to buy that property. But now, the way that the state of New York has handled the last 18 months, rent has fallen. The desirability of these units have really fallen. So we'll do the same formula with the new rents. 20 units by $2,700 per month is $54,000 per month in gross scheduled income, times 12 months in a year is $648,000 per year in gross scheduled income. Take 40% for expenses, that leaves $388,000 for your net operating income. You take that divided by 0.045 is $8.64 million as a valuation. So you would need about $3 million for your down payment there. But the lost property value just from rents falling is $2.3 million. So we look at how these landlords are holding on right now. You have to take into consideration also, now that 25% of tenants are paying rent, the numbers here are much different. So we can have landlords that bought these buildings that are bleeding hand over fist, and now the city is saying, hey, you have to now do these carbon emission changes or you're going to be fined and penalized. This is ultimately going to be passed on to the next seller. If this owner wants to get out from doing this because they simply can't afford it, well, the new buyer is going to factor in this cost with this purchase. And this is how this is going to break down. In 2019, the Wall Street Journal came out and said that the real estate industry faces pricey upgrades from carbon emissions law. So what happened? Not much. The industry didn't kick back too hard, and that's the problem. And this is what's happening now. So at that point in time, the legislation approved Thursday as part of an ambitious package of bills to fight climate change sets carbon emissions target and fines for about 50,000 commercial and residential buildings with more than 25,000 square feet, no rent regulated apartments. This changed. So they pushed this out, and now it's much more broad. It impacts many more building owners, and it's not just the big guys that are going to get hit anymore. It imposes initial requirements for the biggest producers of carbon emissions for 2024. The new regulations aim to slash emissions 40% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. This is going to be a death by 1,000 cuts. Mayor Bill de Blasio said that he intends to sign the legislation. He did. And the total cost, $4 billion. $4 billion spread over 50,000 doors, $80,000 per building. $80,000 per building. Okay. Well, the real deal just came out last week, well, June 30th, about 10, 12 days ago, came out and said many in the real estate industry have called for changes to the law, saying it penalizes high density buildings without taking energy efficiency into account. Critics have pointed out that fines for exceeding emissions caps, which can run into the millions of dollars per year for a single building, will go into the city's general fund rather than towards meeting environmental goals. Millions of dollars per year as a fine. Now, looking right off of the website, right off of the state website, the law requires a majority of new and existing buildings to meet carbon emissions limits per square foot in 2024 and 2030. Intro 1947 introduced a council member, Contagious, amends the definition of rent-regulated apartments were originally exempt from the law, but now buildings are only exempt if more than 35% of the units are rent regulated. This revision will require more buildings to comply with Local Law 97. Certain covered buildings where at least one unit is regulated under either the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974, the Rent Stabilization Law of 1969, or Local Emergency Housing Rent Control Act of 1962. Are granted additional time for compliance. Covered buildings will not have to cap annual buildings emissions until January 1st, 2026, and submissions of a first report will not be required until May 1st, 2027. Beginning in 2024, emissions limits will affect the most carbon-intensive 20% of the buildings. These buildings are over 25,000 square feet and must meet carbon intensity limits depending on the occupancy group of the building. Building emission intensity is measured by the number of metric tons of carbon and equivalent per square foot per year. By 2025, building owners must issue an annual emissions intensity report or will be subject to steep fines. The timing of this is impeccable, and it's all calculated. It's all here for a reason, but take a hard look at what's happening. So we've went over the losses that these landlords have incurred on their buildings due to just how the state's being managed. Second, now the new bill with Local Law 97, where the carbon emissions, just another big ding. But what's fascinating is exactly what they're doing in California is what they're doing in New York, saying that they promise that they're going to make these landlords whole, they're going to take care of the landlords, and the tenants are feeling like, hey, you know what, they're going to pay, I don't have to pay, and it's showing in the numbers, 25% of tenants are paying rent. But Ilhan Omar, she came out in April, late April, with this new bill, and this bill is going to really just be the final nail in the coffin for landlords in New York. Listen to how this is worded. This bill, you can take a look at it, it's right on congress.gov, HR 2851. So housing co-ops offer an alternative to traditional home ownership and rental practices where people can come together to form a not-for-profit cooperative corporation and democratically control their housing. The limited equity co-op model allows each resident to purchase and sell shares in a property, but includes restrictions on how much outgoing members can profit from resales to protect long-term affordability. So you think about it, how it's structured. It's amazing. A tenant with no money for a down payment without going through the stress and aggravation like most people do when they're climbing the economic ladder. They don't have to do that. They can rent an apartment, they can default on the rent, they can put the landlord into financial hardship, then they can utilize this program through Ilhan Omar if it passes. We all know it probably will. Then they can start accumulating wealth just by living in a building. Imagine if we all shopped at Whole Foods and we went to Jeff Bezos and said, hey, we've been shopping at Whole Foods last year. You owe us shares of Amazon. Doesn't work like that. But apparently in New York, that's how they're trying to get things to go. It's quite insane. It's insanity. To me, it seems very likely that in New York City, we're going to start to see real estate pricing come down in a very big way. I think that's likely to follow in Miami. I think it's likely to follow in LA. A lot of these markets where they're going to be forcing these new emission goals because these landlords, many of them, are paying top dollar for their buildings and their tenants aren't paying rent in many cases, and now they're going to be forced to do massive upgrades to their buildings. How are they going to be able to do this in a situation where they're discussing rising interest rates over the next couple years? They increase interest rates, the cost to borrow money increases, rents fall. You do the simple numbers. It's not sustainable. Pricing has to come down. We have to be very conservative and very smart with how we deploy capital in this market because things are very unsure. I personally think that Andrew Cuomo and Newsom, a lot of these people, they're all on the same page and they're getting ready to wreak havoc on the real estate market. But when pain comes, so does opportunity. As one of the Rockefellers said, or I believe it was the Rothschild, they said, buy when there's blood in the street. Right now, the market thinks that it's never going down and everything is going to be good, everything's going to be great, and you can't lose money. And generally, when a market says that, that's usually right before big pain comes. What do you think is going to happen with New York City real estate? Do you think that this trend is very likely to continue? Drop your predictions down below. Smash that like button. Help me share this video. Consider subscribing here. And as well, consider subscribing on my second channel. I'll leave the links pinned down below in the top comment. I'll see you guys in the next video.